the Pacific War ended differently. Not because Japan won the war. They didn't. Japan was never going to win a long war against the United States. The industrial disparity was too vast, the resource math too brutal. Every serious historian agrees on this. But the Pacific War didn't have to end the way it did. The atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The unconditional surrender. The American occupation. The total rewriting of Japanese society from the outside. All of that traces back to one morning. June 4, 1942. The Battle of Midway. 5 minutes that determined whether America could win the Pacific War quickly, or whether it would take 3 more years of grinding island combat that changes the political calculus of how the war ends. June 1942. 6 months after Pearl Harbor. Japan is at the peak of its military power. The Imperial Navy has not lost a major engagement. It has conquered Southeast Asia, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, and the Western Pacific Islands in 6 months of consecutive victory. Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, the smartest strategic mind in the Japanese military, knows this cannot last. He understands American industrial capacity better than any Japanese leader. He studied at Harvard. He toured American factories. He knows that by 1944, American shipyards will be producing carriers faster than Japan can sink them. His plan: lure the remaining American carriers into a decisive battle at Midway Atoll, destroy them, and force the United States to negotiate peace while Japan still holds the initiative. One more decisive victory, and America, exhausted by the war in Europe, facing years of Pacific combat without carriers, might accept a negotiated settlement. The plan is not irrational. It is desperate, but it is logical. And it very nearly works. In our timeline, American intelligence cracked Japanese naval codes and knew the attack was coming. Admiral Nimitz positioned his 3 carriers northeast of Midway, waiting in ambush. On the morning of June 4th, everything nearly went wrong anyway. The American torpedo bombers attacked first, and were slaughtered. 41 planes launched. 35 were shot down. They scored 0 hits. The Japanese fleet seemed untouchable. Then, at 10:22 a.m., 37 dive bombers from the Enterprise and Yorktown found the Japanese fleet from above. The Japanese fighters were all at sea level, having just finished destroying the torpedo bombers. The carriers' decks were loaded with rearming aircraft, fuel lines, and armed bombs. In 5 minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 carriers were fatally hit. The 4th was sunk that afternoon. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, 248 aircraft, and its best-trained pilots in a single day. In this timeline, the Tone Scout plane launches on schedule. Nagumo knows about the American carriers 2 hours earlier. He launches his strike first. Subscribe to the Alternate Archive, a new timeline opens every week. 3 American carriers sunk at Midway. The Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet, destroyed in a single coordinated Japanese strike. The immediate consequence: the United States Navy has no operational fleet carriers in the Pacific. Japan's 4 carriers survive. The balance of naval power that in our timeline shifted permanently on June 4th doesn't shift. Japan retains naval supremacy in the Pacific through late 1943. Does this mean Japan wins the war? No. American industrial capacity is still overwhelming. New Essex-class carriers are already under construction, 12 of them, each superior to anything Japan can build. They begin entering service in late 1943 regardless of Midway's outcome. But the timeline shifts dramatically. In our world, America went on the offensive immediately after Midway, Guadalcanal in August 1942, the Gilbert Islands, the Marshalls, the Philippines. The initiative never returned to Japan. In this timeline, America cannot go on the offensive until late 1943 at the earliest. That's 18 months of Japanese consolidation. 18 months of fortifying island garrisons that in our timeline were still being built when the Marines arrived. The island-hopping campaign still happens. But it begins a year later, against better prepared defenses, with higher American casualties at every step. Tarawa is worse. Iwo Jima is worse. Okinawa is worse. The human cost, historians in this timeline estimate 100,000 to 200,000 additional American combat deaths in the Pacific compared to our world. Proportionally more Japanese deaths as well, perhaps 500,000 more. The Manhattan Project is unaffected by Midway. The atomic bomb is ready by July 1945, same as our timeline. The physics doesn't care who won a naval battle 3 years earlier. But the political context of its use is profoundly different. In our timeline, America had essentially won the Pacific War by mid-1945. Japan's navy was destroyed. Its cities were being firebombed nightly. The home islands were blockaded. The war was over in all but name. The question was whether Japan would accept unconditional surrender without an invasion. In this timeline, the war is further from over. American forces are still fighting in the outer islands. Japan's navy, while diminished, is not annihilated. The home islands are not yet under sustained bombardment. The strategic situation in July 1945 is more like our December 1944. The bomb may still be used. The political pressure to end the war is enormous. But the context is different enough that alternative outcomes are plausible. A demonstration drop on an uninhabited island. A warning followed by a deadline. Or, for most consequentially, a negotiated surrender that allows Japan to retain the emperor as a condition of peace. In this timeline, Japan surrenders in October 1945 following a single atomic bombing of a military target and a Soviet declaration of war. The surrender is conditional, the emperor remains. In our timeline, the American occupation of Japan, 1945 to 1952, was one of the most transformative political experiments in history. MacArthur's team wrote Japan a new constitution. They disbanded the military. They broke up the industrial conglomerates. They gave women the vote. They created a parliamentary democracy where none had existed. They imposed pacifism as a constitutional principle. None of that happens here. Japan in this timeline undergoes self-directed reform. It is not democratic in the American sense. The emperor retains real political authority, limited by a constitution the Japanese themselves write in 1947, but not the puppet figurehead of our world. The Diet has power, but the bureaucracy, the elite civil service that actually ran Japan before, during, and after the war, retains its dominance. The Zaibatsu are not broken up. Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Sumitomo retain their pre-war structure. Japan's economic miracle still happens. The country industrializes ferociously in the 1950s and 1960s, but it is directed by these massive conglomerates rather than the post-war Keiretsu system that replaced them. Japan retains a military. Not the self-defense force of our timeline, constrained by Article 9 to purely defensive operations, but a full conventional military. Japan in this timeline is a nuclear power by 1975. It has aircraft carriers. It projects power in the Western Pacific. The Cold War in the Pacific looks dramatically different. Japan is not an American client state. It is an independent great power, allied with the United States against the Soviet Union out of strategic interest, not constitutional obligation. The relationship is more like France-NATO than Japan-US in our world. So what does 2026 look like? Japan is the world's second largest economy, same as our timeline's peak ranking, never overtaken by China because Japan's unbroken zaibatsu structure allowed more aggressive industrial policy and faster capital deployment in the critical 1980s. Japan's GDP is roughly $8 trillion. China is third at $6 trillion. The emperor is still a political figure. Naruhito, the same man who is emperor in our timeline, reigns as a constitutional monarch with the power to dissolve the diet, appoint prime ministers from the majority party, and veto legislation, a power used rarely but meaningfully. Japanese democracy is real but structured differently, less populist, more institutionally mediated, with higher voter trust in bureaucratic expertise. Women's rights advance more slowly. Without the occupation-imposed constitutional equality, Japanese feminism followed its own timeline, roughly 15 to 20 years behind our world. Full workplace equality legislation came in 2005 rather than the 1980s. The gender pay gap is still larger than in our timeline's Japan. The cultural costs are real. The specific Japanese-American cultural synthesis that our world produced, anime influenced by Disney, Japanese baseball, the jazz cafes of Shinjuku, the specific creative friction of two cultures imposed upon each other, exists differently here. Japanese culture is purer in some sense, less hybrid, less globally influential because less globally connected through the American cultural pipeline. Korea is different. Without the American occupation of Japan reorganizing the Pacific power structure, the Korean War still happens but its dynamics shift. Japan's military involvement, impossible in our timeline due to Article 9, occurs here. The outcome is roughly similar, divided peninsula, but the political relationships between Japan, Korea, and the US are fundamentally different. The atomic legacy is different. Only one city was bombed, not two. The global anti-nuclear movement is smaller because the horror is smaller. Nuclear proliferation may be slightly greater because the taboo is weaker. Japan itself possesses nuclear weapons, approximately 200 warheads, which changes the Pacific security calculus considerably. 5 minutes at Midway determined whether America would win the Pacific War in 3 years or 5. That difference, 2 years, changed how the war ended. How it ended changed what Japan became. What Japan became changed the entire Pacific power structure for 80 years. A scout plane launched 30 minutes late. That's the mechanism. A single aircraft from the cruiser Tone, delayed by a catapult malfunction, spotted the American fleet too late for Nagumo to react. 30 minutes. A mechanical fault in a catapult. The world you live in, our world where Japan is a pacifist democracy, where American military bases dot the Pacific, where the US-China rivalry is the defining geopolitical tension of your lifetime, exists because a catapult jammed on a Japanese cruiser at dawn on June 4, 1942. If that catapult had worked, would the world be better or worse? I genuinely don't know. A Japan that was never occupied retained its sovereignty but also retained its flaws. An Asia with an armed Japan is more multipolar, possibly more stable, possibly more dangerous. Tell me which world you'd choose. I keep changing my answer. Until the vault opens again, subscribe to the Alternate Archive.